It's 3 a.m. in New York, 8 in Abuja, and 4 on a Thursday afternoon here in Seoul. I'm Moon Gun-young. You're watching Arirang, Korea's only global network. We start with the latest on the criminal investigation into the Sewolho ferry disaster. The captain and 3 senior crew members of the sunken ferry have been indicted on charges of manslaughter as prosecutors continue to seek the arrest of the people who own the ferry operator. Here's Arirang News Kwon So-a with the latest on this developing story.
State prosecutors on Thursday indicted Sewolho ferry captain Lee Joon-seok and 3 other crew members on charges of homicide. They say the 4 fled the ill-fated ferry without first evacuating hundreds of passengers on board and also calling them to remain in their cabins. Prosecutors say some of the crew confessed that they did not attempt to save passengers because they themselves wanted to survive. If found guilty, they could face a maximum penalty of life in prison or even the death penalty. At the Gwangju District Court in the south of the country, the prosecutors also indicted 11 other crew members for negligence of duty and violation of maritime law, which stipulates they should have been the last to leave the ship. Instead, they also escaped from the ferry as soon as they realized that water levels were rising. They are also accused of changing out of their uniforms during the rescue operation, making it difficult for the Coast Guard to distinguish them from passengers. Prosecutors are also putting more pressure on Yoo Byung-on, the practical owner of the Sewolho ferry's operator. He's been called in for questioning this Friday and is currently believed to be holed up inside a religious facility in Anseong, Gyeonggi-do province, where members of the so-called Salvation sect are gathered in big numbers and accusing authorities of infringing upon their religious rights. The Yoo family founded the group. The sect has been under fire since weeks as it is accused of being involved in the Yoo family's wrongdoings and as some of the Sewolho sailors are members of the cult. Kwon So-a, Arirang News.
In a little under 3 weeks' time, Koreans will head to the polls to cast their ballots in the June 4th local elections. Campaigning is about to kick into high gear, but this election, unlike ones in years gone by, will be far less spirited as the nation continues to mourn the hundreds of people who lost their lives in the Sewolho ferry disaster. Here's our political correspondent, Kim Young-gil.
The ruling Saenuri Party's Election Management Committee held its first meeting on Thursday to discuss its strategy for the upcoming local elections. The committee's chairman Lee Wang-gu said campaigns under the Saenuri Party banner will be toned down this year in light of the Sewolho ferry tragedy.
The whole election process will focus on reinforcing the country's safety measures. Our Election Management Committee will devise plans to help the families of Sewolho ferry disaster victims. Election campaigns will be carried out in the most humble way possible.
Candidates in the local races are registering this Thursday and Friday. The incumbent mayor of Incheon, Song Young-gil of the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy, was one of the first to show up at the National Election Commission headquarters in Incheon on Thursday morning to make his candidacy official. Saenuri lawmaker Nam Kyung-pil resigned from his seat on Thursday and announced he was running for the governorship of Gyeonggi-do province. All the candidates will be allowed to start campaigning next Thursday on May 22nd. For the first time in Korean local election history, people will be able to cast their ballots before voting day on June 4th. Early voting will be held on May 30th and the 31st. The outcome of the nationwide election is being regarded as a litmus test for the Park Geun-hye administration, which entered its second year in February. We will have to wait for the results on election day to see which political party earns the trust of the people to institute change. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
Over in Turkey, rescuers are hunting desperately for scores of Turkish coal miners still missing after an explosion caused a pit to collapse, killing nearly 300 people. Our Shin Se-min reports on the worst mining accident in that country's history.
The Turkish government is facing mounting criticism over what has become the nation's deadliest mining disaster. Protests have broken out in parts of the country, with demonstrators voicing their anger over the government's failure to improve mine safety and Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan's move to privatize the mining sector. Police used tear gas and water cannons to disperse protesters in Istanbul who tried to march on the country's energy ministry. Turkey's major trade unions have joined in, calling a one-day strike. Prime Minister Erdogan, while visiting the accident site in Soma, tried to defend his government by pointing out that such disasters occur everywhere.
Such mine accidents do not happen only in Turkey. It happens in many countries, and many people died in such coal mine accidents. Our country is in a much better position.
The disaster has given fuel to an already outraged segment of the Turkish population, upset over corruption allegations surrounding the prime minister and those closest to him. The death toll from the mining accident has topped 270 and looks sure to rise even further. No survivors have surfaced since early Wednesday. Government officials say about 120 workers remain trapped in the mine some 2 kilometers underground. Shin Arirang News.
Now, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will lay out his official stance on Japan's push for the right to collective self-defense later this afternoon. Local media reports Abe will hold a press conference after receiving a report on the issue today. The Japanese leader is expected to explain specific scenarios under which collective self-defense can be exercised, and this may include a neighboring country coming under attack. There is also speculation Japan may include the scenario of a war on the Korean peninsula. South Korea's foreign ministry has stressed Seoul needs to give its explicit consent when it comes to any and all contingencies on the peninsula. Meanwhile, senior diplomats from Korea and Japan are in their second round of talks this Thursday afternoon on Japan's wartime sexual enslavement. Seoul's foreign ministry says it'll focus on proving the so-called comfort women were forced into sexual servitude and were not, as some in Japan claim, working as prostitutes. Well, not much progress were made at their first meeting in Seoul last month, and the Korean government intends to use letters released by the Chinese government in March that prove the women were forced to work in Japanese military brothels. More than 200,000 women, mostly Korean, were forced to serve Japanese troops in the early 20th century. Tokyo claims the issue was settled through a 1965 treaty when the two countries normalized diplomatic ties. Now, these are concerns Japan might want to focus more on other issues during today's talks, like Korea's import restrictions on Japanese fisheries or Tokyo's moves to boost its military presence. Here in Korea, home to some of the world's most tech-savvy consumers, more people are using their smartphones to do their banking. Well, the Bank of Korea says that the number of smartphone banking users stood at over 40 million as of the end of March, which is up 8.5% from the end of last year. Well, the average amount of money moved around on smartphones stood at roughly $1.5 billion. That, however, makes up only 4.5% of all internet banking transactions because the service is mainly used for small sum transactions. And the number of credit cards in the wallets of Koreans isn't quite as big as it used to be. The Financial Supervisory Service says the number of credit cards held per person came to 3.9 on average last year. This is the first time since 2007 that the figure has dipped below 4. The financial watchdog attributed the drop to an increase in the number of debit cards issued and recent leaks of personal data. Well, debit cards, in fact, seem to be filling that vacuum. Total spending on debit cards is expected to top $88 billion this year. Let's move on to Korea's car industry. The nation's automakers and the auto industry in general enjoyed a strong month in April. Double-digit growth was seen in all production, domestic sales, and exports. Here's our Park Ji-won with the details.
Korea's auto industry fared very well last month in all areas: production, domestic sales, and exports. According to figures released by the Trade Ministry Thursday, Korea's auto industry logged double-digit growth across the board in April compared to the same month last year. Vehicle exports in particular hit a record high in April, coming in at over $4.8 billion. Exports of auto parts reached the second highest ever monthly amount at $2.34 billion. Breaking down the figures by automaker, Hyundai Motor and Kia Motors, which shipped nearly 80% of all vehicles last month, posted double-digit growth on year. The popularity of Hyundai's small and mid-sized models, such as Accent and Avante, and the increasing popularity of Kia's new K3 played a big part in the staunch growth. Normalized operations at Hyundai and Kia's assembling factories in Korea also attributed to the on-year growth. Auto sales in Korea saw an over 11% on-year increase in April. More than 147,000 units were sold domestically. Of the total, over 130,000 were Korean cars, and they were mainly mid-sized cars and sports utility vehicles. It marks the first time in 16 months that Korean automakers have sold more than 130,000 units in Korea in a single month. Production was in full swing as well. Over 433,000 cars were manufactured in Korea in April, up more than 12% on year. 박지원, Arirang News.
When the latest news meets the latest business stories, we give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Business Today with Moon Gon-young. Every weekday, only on Arirang.
A jury in the U.S. has ordered Korean auto giant Hyundai Motor to pay damages of well over $200 million after finding that a defect in one of the cars caused a head-on smash that killed two teenagers in 2011. But as our Connie Kim reports, Hyundai is about to appeal.
A jury in the U.S. state of Montana has ordered Hyundai Motor to pay a staggering $248 million in punitive damages over a manufacturing defect in a Hyundai vehicle that caused a deadly car accident 3 years ago. The jury also ordered that of the total, Hyundai pay $8.6 million in damages to the families of the two teenagers that died in the July 2011 crash. The verdict says a defective steering knuckle in the Hyundai Tiburon caused it to suddenly veer into an oncoming lane, where it crashed head-on with another automobile. The maximum cap for steering knuckle defects stands at $10 million, but a judge in the state ruled the amount is not high enough to deter future wrongdoings by super-wealthy multinational firms. In 2005, Hyundai Motor recalled 111 Tiburons manufactured over a one-month period that year due to steering issues, but it's unclear if the Hyundai model involved in the 2011 crash had been made during that time. Hyundai Motor has called the damage award outrageous and says it will appeal. It argues that a firecracker set off inside the vehicle might have caused the crash. Eyewitnesses say they saw a firework explode in the car prior to the accident, but police say they found no evidence to suggest the explosion. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
A U.S. court has thrown out an appeal by Samsung Electronics to revise a patent ruling that was handed down in Apple's favor. The U.S. Court of Appeals said that it agreed with the U.S.-based International Trade Commission's ruling last June, which said Apple did not infringe on 3 of Samsung's patents. The court did not elaborate on this reasoning. The ITC had ruled that Apple infringed on one of Samsung's patents, which was not ruled upon on Wednesday. Apple devices with the technology were subject to import bans, but this was overturned by the White House last August. The Obama administration claimed the technology was covered by the standard essential patent, which ensures devices made by different companies communicate with each other. Meanwhile, leading U.S. banking institution J.P. Morgan Chase expects the U.S. economy to grow by 3% in the latter half of the year. Well, at a seminar hosted by the Korean Chamber of Commerce and Industry in New Jersey Wednesday, the firm's senior economist Robert Millman gave the outlook, saying the U.S. economy has come out of recession and is expanding at a moderate pace. However, he said America's real GDP growth for the first half will likely be 1.6%, and this is due to the effects of the extreme cold snap this past winter. Today is Teachers' Day here in Korea, which is a day for students and graduates to show their respect and gratitude to their teachers. Now, normally the day is filled with festive events, but this year it won't be celebrated in quite the same way, as our Song Ji-sun reports.
They serve as our instructors, confidants, and counselors, and are in some cases as important as a parent, because a good teacher can change our lives. In honor of them, over 100 countries celebrate Teachers' Day. About a fifth of them do so on World Teachers' Day on October 5th. But here in Korea, it's celebrated on May 15th, the birthday of King Sejong, who invented the Korean alphabet. Teachers' Day was started over 5 decades ago by young members of Korea's Red Cross who volunteered to visit their teachers who are retired or had fallen ill. More than 50 years later, students today give carnations to their teachers in the same way they give them to their parents 1 week earlier. It's a less than subtle nod to the importance of the teachers and the roles they play.
The ways of celebrating Teachers' Day have evolved over the years. Students sometimes wash their teachers' feet, cook them food, and bring the food to their teachers' homes.
But this year's Teachers' Day will not be celebrated like the years gone by. There'll be no celebratory events as a mark of respect to the victims of Sewolho ferry disaster. For the first time, all commemorative events have been canceled, and the week has been designated as a week for mourning. In light of the disaster, the Education Ministry has banned mass school field trips until at least June, and the teachers are calling for proactive steps to ensure the safety of students nationwide.
We urge the government to step up safety training for the students and also to better train the teachers so they are all capable of handling emergency situations.
Some schools have scheduled special safety sessions for students on this Teachers' Day, while others have organized visits to a memorial altar in Ansan that has been set up for the ferry disaster victims. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
And in light of the Teachers' Day today here in Korea, we wanted to discuss the business and economic aspects of the nation's education system. Well, Korea's education system has long been the subject of controversy, as some say there is just too much competition, while a recent survey actually released by an education and publishing firm, Pearson, named Korea the best place in the world for education. Well, let's take an in-depth look. For that, we are joined live by our regular contributor, Dr. Kim Byung-ju. Good afternoon to you, Dr. Kim.
Good afternoon.
So this education system here in Korea, let's start with something that is very uniquely Korean, however, absolutely dominant in the Korean education system, which is the private education market.
Right.
Now, how big is the industry? I mean, how fast is it growing?
We believe, I think a lot of us believe this, maybe we need more time to confirm it, but a lot of us, I'm sure, believe Korea is the country that probably spends the largest amount, relatively speaking, amount in private education. We have prepared some interesting numbers that we want to show you. So let's bring that up on the screen here. And I would like to tell you, first of all, by comparing the overall size of education budget, which is, I think, a red bar, compare that with the private education spending right there. This probably is the largest relative size of private education spending as compared to the official government spending, I believe. This year, government budget is about 50 trillion won, and the average annual private education spending estimated under the current administration is now projected to be about 30 trillion won. So it's about 60% of official spending, which, once again, I believe is the largest in the world. Overall, these blue bars show the trend of growth over the years. We've been having quote-unquote problem with private education ever since the 80s, Chun Doo-hwan administration. And for the next 20 years, from the beginning of Chun Doo-hwan administration until Kim Dae-jung administration, DJ Kim, we are seeing on the screen right here about 20 times growth over the 20 years. And in Nomu현 administration, we saw a big jump right there, as you can see. And then since then, they're saying Lee Myung-bak administration, actually, we saw some decline during his tenure overall during 5 years, but still, we saw considerable growth. And once again, we are expecting considerable growth during this administration as well. So this is the overall landscape we are talking about.
Well, we have been seeing various government measures in order to root out or eradicate private education altogether because of the huge spending and the burden on the households. But teachers in the private segment of the education system, you know, may or may not receive carnations today. But where do they stand in terms of the status and what kind of challenges do they face?
In terms of money, probably many of them stand for like a big money earning status.
So money guaranteed there, not carnations.
Right, not carnations, but not carnations, but money perhaps for some of them, because I can tell you that perhaps some of Korea's best and brightest actually continue to enter this private education market because it's lucrative. If you are a successful so-called quote-unquote star here in Korean private education market, you can make a lot of money. Of course, we see considerable polarization among these teachers here, and some of the teachers, many of the teachers probably in the private education will not receive a carnation, meaning that they're not being treated as regular teachers. But then again, these are very hard-working people, and some of them, as I said, producing lots of fascinating and admired results in terms of academic performance for their students, but many of them still also earning little money there. So this is a very interesting segment of education industry here, but its change is something that a lot of people are keeping their eyes on.
Well, moving on to the official sector of the education, a lot of Korea's school teachers, they have been complaining that, in fact, they don't get the kind of recognition that they had been getting before, and that students don't actually get their education from school, but instead they get it from private education and then just come to school for the sake of being there.
You're saying all this interesting stuff because, first of all, in terms of respect itself, there was a report that came out produced by OECD at the end of last year showing that Korean teachers believe they don't receive as much of respect from the students. Only 11% of Korean teachers were saying they're getting enough respect from the students, as compared to 75% in China. So Korea was ranked one of the lowest among the level of respect that teachers feel that they get from the students. But the thing is, Korea's students, in terms of their pays, they were ranked number 3 among the OECD nations, and number 4 in overall status. Rewards. So they're being treated pretty well in the international standard, but they don't feel they get the respect. Why? Because of the competition from the private education. We have funny things saying here in Korea saying, well, study is done in hagwons, private education schools, and the homework is done at home, and sleeping is done in school. So we have this kind of distorted landscape overall, but we do actually have very good teachers in school here in Korea. During the 80s and 90s, we were talking about brain drain because of the high pay in the private sector. We were concerned about the best and brightest moving on to a private sector. But since the economic crisis in 1997, the job stability, job security was very much highlighted. And since then, a lot of really best and brightest and the teachers with great care and strong commitment for students actually have joined Korean schools. So we do have them in place. Whether they feel they get the right respect or not, I think it has a lot to do with the changing culture of the students. I'm sure they do have reasonable respect for the teachers.
I think comparatively speaking, compared to decades ago where, they said you don't even step on the shadow of your teacher. So
Right.
that's the kind of maybe respect that they're expecting.
Right.
Now, after all the trouble, students do go to college and then they face another set of challenges.
Right. This is a subject of discussion for some other time because I'm sure we're tight on time here. But in colleges, of course, students face this great challenge of having to deal with the so-called preparation for the job market, and also in Korea what we call specs, like foreign language training, overseas experience, internships, and all that. Korean students in Korean universities and colleges, they have their attention being diverted away from the classrooms. So a lot of university professors, including myself, I suppose, feel that the environment overall is not really conducive in terms of sharing our inspiration, encouragement for the life and excitement for the life and the vision and all that kind of stuff, which is a real part of a real true teaching for students that's being done in classroom. I think that's a lot of it is missing at this point in Korean college classrooms, and I'm sure we should improve upon that for sure.
Right, but however, I think we have hope that this the system could improve, as yearnings for education is probably one of the highest in the world here amongst Koreans.
Indeed, good point.
All right, Dr. Kim Byung-ju, thank you so much for today.
Thank you.
And that's your business today on this Thursday. Thank you for watching, and do join us again at 6 p.m. Korea time on Early Edition at 6.